need to continue to remember our president in our prayers as he's going through what he's going through right now. We left off with David. David had went to Nob and visited with Abimelech. And of course, we looked into that and found out that David wasn't fully 100% honest with the priest. David kind of held back what was going on, and we covered that and found out pretty well why. But remember that we're looking at an individual that has a temperament that is kind of bouncy. When I was in seminary, the thing that excited me about seminary is they didn't teach us how to preach. They gave us tools to study by. And one of those many tools that they gave us to put in our spiritual toolbox was character studies with application. Otherwise, when you study a person in the Bible, you put that person alongside you and see if that person has what you have. Do you do what that person does? You remember Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount told us to be careful in our judging, because a lot of times when we're judging somebody, we got three fingers pointing back to ourselves. Well, that happens in temperament study. That happens in just character study. When you study these individuals, I've learned so much about myself as I have studied David. David had what you call an introvert spirit, temperament, as well as an extrovert. That means that he was very outward or very inward. And so David had both of these that he had to contend with, being phlegmatic, sanguine, and then, on the other end, a melancholy. Melancholy are extroverts. They hold things in, they get angry, and so forth like that. And so when you start to see these things surface with an individual, you don't even have to know temperament to see these fluctuations with individuals. When somebody can get hotter in the color just like that, you can automatically mark down their melancholy. If they can shake it off, happy-go-lucky, you understand there, that's a sanguine. Then if an individual just kind of floats along very slowly, they got 3 speeds, then you understand that they're phlegmatic. The hard part of it is to be around them long enough to where you see the mix. And the Lord gave me those tools to be able to see some of these things. Now David has done something that has surprised a lot of people. Matter of fact, some commentaries won't even touch on it. In chapter 21 of Samuel, verse 10 through 15, David has left Nob and he went to Gath. What was that Gath? Anybody tell me? If you look up on the map that I handed out to you on page 13, I think it's on yours, Gath is right over there where Israel still has a lot of problems. A lot of problems. But that was controlled by the Philistines. And the Philistines were making inroads into Israel and capturing places in Israel. Okay? Now the question that I have is, why did David go into the enemy's camp? Now if you do your homework, you'll find out this is the area that Goliath came from. So why would David make the choice to go into Gath? Why would he go into the enemy's camp? Do you ever think about that? You see, we read something and we read over it. David, remember, he's running from Saul. He's hiding from Saul. And probably in his thinking, he's saying, the best thing for me to do is go and mix and mingle with the enemy. And we will see this, we will visit this a little bit later on as we get a little further in this scenario with David running as a refuge, for refuge. And so he makes a decision, okay? When he gets there, things didn't work out the way he was thinking they were going to work out. Because one of the servants of the king went to the king and said, "Do you know who that guy is? He's the king of the land. That's David. Remember all the women singing and making joy about David has killed what? Saul has killed what?" And so there was a reminder. Well, the king decided he's going to put him in stocks. He's going to arrest him, he's going to put him in stocks, make him his prisoner. Well, it's amazing because you go back and you study a little bit about sanguines. Sanguines make good actors. They can put on the front. And what they can do is they can camouflage things. And what did David do? He started spitting and letting the spittle run down his beard and everything, and started acting like a madman. Well, what did they do? Let's get rid of this guy. He's a nobody. Let's get rid of him. We don't need that kind of a person around us. So what I want us to do this morning is just kind of pay attention, because remember, we have the Old Testament to read from. We have the New Testament to kind of give us an understanding about things over here. And so when I think about David going in for refuge, but let's go back and look at something that he said if he wrote Psalms 1, okay? In Psalms 1. I am persuaded that he did write this, but I don't take it to the extreme. But notice this. Watch it real close. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. Okay, now what does that say? It says that happy, spiritual, abundant person in the Lord will not take the advice of the ungodly. I want to ask you a question. If you have pressure starting to come on you have difficulties in your life, where do you go? Where do you go? If the situation develops itself that you're not comfortable in going to God's people, even the preacher, who are you going to go to? You're going to go to a friend. Is that friend a child of God? Is that friend a prayer giant? Or is that friend a friend in the world? Are you following me? Now let's go on. He goes on, he says, nor sitteth in the way of the sinner, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. Now if you look at the rotation of that, if you start taking the wrong advice, and I've seen a lot of that in ministry with God's people, before long they're away from the church. And they've teamed up with their lost friends. Okay? Once you start taking their advice, you're going to start walking around with them. Are you following me? And as you're walking around with them, you're going to become a critic just like they are. Now, in your own heart, in your own mind, go back. You're supposed to evaluate. If you judge, you're supposed to evaluate correctly. Have you done that? Have you run to the wrong people, got the wrong advice? Started sitting with them because you appreciated their advice, and then back here you started criticizing the ones you should have been praying for? Are you following me? So when we take character study and bring David alongside, we say that we make wrong choices. Now, David didn't do any of these because we'll look at other Psalms later that even though he messed up, his heart was still in tune. He always recognized when he got out of step. Okay? And so it goes on and says that his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, and bringeth forth fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whether he goeth shall prosper. So here David is using an advantage to camouflage the situation to where he could find escape. In our own minds, we can do that. And God honors that. Once we know that we're in a pickle and we need to get out of it. The interesting thing of this situation is there's other places in the Word of God that gives us caution. Caution of going to the enemy's camp. I want you to turn your Bible with me for advice. Go with me to Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. In Ephesians chapter 4, listen to this real close. In verse 17. This I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you henceforth walk not as other Gentiles walk, in the vanity of their mind, having the understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God through the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who being past feeling have given themselves over to lasciviousness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. If you go to James chapter 4, verse 4, if you become a friend of the world, you become an enemy of God. So what I'm saying about David here, David might not fall in this line, but you and I have an advantage, because when we even think about going to the enemy's camp for advice, there should be a warning. They can't give me good advice because they're godless. They're godless. They might say something worthwhile, but what I need to understand is I need to understand spiritual truth, that I can establish spiritual foundation. You follow me? And follow through on that. And so David went into the enemy's camp. Turn your Bible with me to Psalms 34. In Psalms 34, I made mention in another lesson that some of the Psalms, you have to read it because they're parts and pieces. David kind of kept a ledger of his Psalms that he wrote. When these were collected and put together, a lot of them kind of went in the same course rather than stopping. So here in this psalm, you can see that he's still in his heart serving the Lord. And many that study the psalm says this psalm came into existence by David's pen through this situation right here. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continue to be in my mouth. My soul shall make her boast in the Lord. The humble shall hear thereof. Go ahead. Almighty, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and delivered me from all of my fears. When I may mention that once in the sermon, I had a person get all over me. I said, could you think for a minute that David, all this is happening, David knew the jeopardy that he was placing himself in, and in his heart, he's praying to God, I need some help. And all at once, this suggestion came to his mind, start acting like a madman. You know, we don't think about God that way. We don't think that God will just drop thoughts into our thinking. I've talked to people that hadn't been of the devil. No. He needed refuge. He needed escape. So is there a possibility while he's in his heart talking to God, I got myself into this dilemma, now how am I going to get out of it? All at once, cloud, a thought came. And David responded to that, and what happened? He got away. He was able to get away. Let's go on. He goes on, he says, Verse 5. They looked unto him, and they were delighted. These were his men. Were delighted. And their faces were not ashamed. Okay? This poor man. You see, David in his heart, if you look at it real close, even though he made terrible mistakes, in his heart, he humbled himself. Even when Nathan had to confront him over some of his calamities, he humbled himself. That's what the Lord looks at when he looks at his children. He's looking at where the heart is. Is it haughty? Is it humble? That's what God looks at. He goes on and he says, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all of his trouble. The angel of the Lord is camped around about them that fear the Lord and delivereth them. When I look at that psalm there, and I look at David's situation, I say, David in his heart is calling on God's help. Even though he's not uttered with his mouth. You and I, and that's the problem with Gentiles. According to Paul's writings over in Romans chapter 2, verse 14, the Gentiles accepted the law. Okay? But what they did is they used the law, and if we're not careful, we do the same thing to accuse or excuse. And we're somewhat all guilty. I am. We will accuse somebody of something, at the same time, we will excuse somebody else for doing the same thing. We usually find that in the family. A church member does this and they're slam dunk. They're criticized. They're judged. But a family member can do the very same thing and they are not. And don't even you say a word. Are you following me? That's how we as Gentiles work. And one individual that I wrote was Schofield, another one, a preacher over in England. He said that we have to be Bibling. We have to know enough of the Old Testament, enough of the New Testament, that we can make a rational, spiritual decision in our judgments. We have to judge rightly. And so when we do that, if a family member is just as guilty as that person, that church member, then don't justify the family member. You follow me? And we have a lot of that. And it's sad within churches across our country. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 seems like it's out of sector or out of balance over in chapter verse 33. Evil communications corrupt good manners. Evil communication, when you break that down, it means evil companions. Those that you're taking your advice from. Those that you're associating with corrupt good manners. So that's why the Bible cautions us from going and looking at the world and getting their information. So I'm just bringing this out to show you what we learned from David when David went into the enemy camp. What would we do if we go into the enemy camp? We have to be very, very careful. We have to magnify the Lord in all that we do. In our actions, our thoughts, our words, and all. So this is very interesting when you look at. I want you to turn your Bible to 1 Corinthians chapter 5 with me. I know I'm spending a little bit of time on this one, but I felt it necessary because of 50 years of dealing with these type of situations in the church. Notice this in verse 9. I wrote unto you in an epistle, not to company with fornicators, yet not altogether with fornicators of this world, or with the covetous, or the extortioners, or with idolaters, for then must you need to go out of the world. Otherwise, to remove ourselves from any of this, we would almost have to go out of the world. We'd have to go on another planet. And that's what he's saying. To be away from this, we'd have to go out. So we're always going to somehow be influenced by it. Let's go on. And now I have written unto you not to keep company if any man or any person that is called a brother, being a fornicator or a covetous or an idolater or a railer or a drunkard or an extortioner, with such a one, no, not eat. That means do not have fellowship with them. Can anybody tell me a good reason why not to?
Because you'll end up like them if you hang around them all the time.
Okay, if you take their counsel, you start sitting around with them, you're going to start acting like them. I've seen a lot of that with God's people. They're not in church work today because of this very same thing. So the first thing I saw when I saw David going into the camp of Gath, I shook my head. David, don't do this. How could I say that? Because I know the New Testament. And I have the Spirit of God in me. David had the Spirit of God on him. I have him in me. And having him in me and you having him in you, he can give you great counsel. And I don't know about you, but anytime I get into a situation like that, I get a stop sign. I got all these signs that end up in my brain. I had a guy who told me I was half crazy. No. There's certain things that just a stop sign goes up. A caution sign goes up. This feeling of, don't go any further. You got a birthday there. Do we have stop signs? We have caution signs. We have yield signs. We have all those to contend with, don't we? God has the same thing for us if we listen and pay attention to the Spirit of God that's supposed to be dwelling within us. So when we judge, we have to be very careful in our evaluation to make sure that they are correct before God. David now has fled again. This time he goes southward to a cave in Adullam, so he could find some refuge. If you take your map there on verse 13 and look at it, you get it pointed down here in the lower part of about around Hebron, north of Hebron, south of Hebron, west of Hebron. You get this area that David he's well known and knowledgeable in this area. He was a shepherd in these areas. And so these are areas that the Philistines have pretty well penetrated. And it's caused a lot of problems with Israel. But David has fled now to Adullam where he could find refuge. He was familiar with the place, and during this time his parents and others had come to him. And remember, he took them down into Moab at Mespah to his mother's hometown, his great-grandmother's hometown, put him under the protection of the king of Moab. David had a tremendous relationship with the Moabites because of his family. Well, while he was there, he was enjoying kind of some comfort time, some peace time, and enjoying his parents and sort of like that, and these people that were around him had come. But the prophet there came and said, you need to leave. You need to leave. And the reason of it is that David stayed there and Saul would have found out about it, what would have happened there? Saul would have come down there. So Gad told David, leave. He didn't give any explanation, but all indicators show that he was safeguarding this area. Okay? David left this area. Okay? David returned to the cave of Adullam, and here is where David had wrote many of his songs while he was Turn with me to verse, Psalm chapter 142. 142. Next week, if I'm here, I'll give you a list of some of the Psalms and how they fit in the Scriptures. It takes time to read them out because I've read some other people's writings that it just didn't quite fit with what he's talking about. In the cave, you can feel and sense it. That's why character study to me is important. Because if you can get into the person's skin, you can begin to understand what they're going through. David and his men kind of felt like outcasts. Okay? So here he says, I cried unto the Lord with my voice. With my voice unto the Lord did I make my supplication. I poured out my complaint before him. I showed before him my trouble. When my spirit was overwhelmed within me, then thou knowest my path. In the way wherewith I walked, have I privately led a snare. They have privately led a snare for me. Look on my right hand, and behold, but there is no man that would know me. Refuge fail me. No man careth for my soul. I cried unto thee, O Lord. I said, thou art my refuge and my portion in the land of the living. Attend unto my ear, for I am wrought very low. Deliver me from the persecutor, for they are stronger than I. Bring my soul out of prison, that I might praise thy name. The righteous shall compass me about, for thou shalt deal bountifully with me. Feel his heart. Feel what he's going through. Put yourself over here. Everything that has been happening to him, running for his life, even having been told by the prophets, you need to leave. And he did. He get into this cave, and then he starts pouring it out. Have you ever prayed this prayer? Have you ever looked at this prayer at the time of your sorrow? At the time of your complaints? See, that you can feel what David is feeling in part. And then you can turn to the Lord just like David, knowing that you have a refuge. One of the things that I learned shortly after my salvation, I had a refuge. Jesus became my refuge. I had a place to go. When people didn't understand me and my situations and so forth, they made bad judgment calls. And I got the brunt of it. I had a place to go. One day it got very heavy on me and I went to church. I worked not very far from church, and I had a key to the church. And I went in on my break and I got down on my knees and I cried out to God. Later on, studying this song, as David was saying it, I felt what he was probably feeling a little bit. And I found out that the Lord was my refuge and my portion. When I got off of my knees, I didn't care what anybody said. From here on out, it's me and the Lord. Isn't that great? You got somebody you can put your confidence in. He'll never leave you. He'll never forsake you. He'll never let you down in any given situation. Sometimes you might not hear anything right away because he's working it out. But nevertheless, you have confidence in one who is your refuge and your portion when you serve the Lord. So David started pouring out his heart in this cave. And many of these songs, and I won't go into them right now, we'll touch on some of them, came because of this. During this time, he also accumulated some more warriors that came on his fighting side. The next thing that happened is Saul had went down into Nob and confronted Ahimelech and demanded his men to kill him. I respected his men. That's found over there in chapter 22, 6 and 22. I admired the men because not one of his men would raise a sword. I looked at it. And looking at character study and looking at situations and putting yourself there and making the application that you can learn from that. We are all warriors together. Aren't we all laborers together in Christ? Huh? Do you know how it would be if we would come to each other's offense? And if somebody in the crowd, say the preacher said, we need to crucify Charles. I'm thankful that I'm not recognized in heaven by Charles. I've been given a new name. God doesn't recognize me as Charles Johnston. I've been given a new name. You say, what is it? I can tell you. Because the only one who knows is me. And I don't know what it is. All I know is he gets my attention. And that's good enough for me, right? So here, when King Saul said, I want you to kill him, they went good. They all backed off. I feel, and there's nothing established in it, but I feel in my own heart, and this is where we can get into Charlieology or whatever the case might be. I feel at this point his men began to develop a disrespect for their king. But one man, David, the one that reported to Saul where David was, David. How many men did how many priests who wore the ephod did he kill? 85. He literally wiped out the priesthood at all, except one. Can anybody tell me who that one was? His name's Abiathar, the son of Elimelech. He left and he went and told David what had happened. David's heart was literally broken because right then the magnitude of the deception. I don't think David purposely tried to deceive, but he needed help. And as I said when we were back here, when David went to the priest and said, I've been sent by the king, that was a lie. If he would have told the king that he was fleeing, the king would have asked him to leave. The priest would have asked him to leave. And so David had to come up with this story that he could get some help. Now it has come on his heart what he has done. The remorse. Turn your Bible with me to Psalms 52. Psalms 52. In Psalms 52 it says, Why boastest thyself in mischief, O mighty man? The goodness of God endureth continually. Thy tongue deviseth mischief, like a sharp razor, working deceitfully. Thou lovest evil more than good, and lying rather than to speak righteousness. And notice he pauses. Thou lovest all devouring words, O thou deceitful tongue. God shall likewise destroy thee forever. He shall take away and pluck thee out of thy dwelling place, and root out of the land of the living. Sheila, stop, pause. Think about what you've already read. The righteous shall see and fear, and shall laugh at him. Lo, this is the man that made not God his strength, but trusted in the abundance of his riches, and strengthened himself in his wickedness. But I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever. I will praise thee forever, because thou hast done it, and I will wait on thy name. For it is good before thy saints. David prayed this. And what he's doing is this wicked one is Dula, or Adug, that did this. And yet, listen, it goes back to Saul. David would not raise his hand up against Saul. But even in his prayer, the wickedness that has caused this is going to be punished, and it's going to be punished greatly because of God. Now I want to ask you a question. Sometimes we have to discipline people. Why do we discipline them? And what attitude do we have when we discipline them? We know that the Bible tells us that discipline is necessary. Very necessary. And at the very point, if we have to put somebody out of the fellowship, God will work in that individual. You see, the bottom line of any judgment is God. Any judgment is God. We have our prayer that we can pray to God just like David because of the remorse that come on our hearts and the calamity that has happened. And we can pour out our heart and say, Lord, deal with them. He will. And David knew that God would deal with this situation. That's why that one prayer right there, when you really get into it, do it with the pauses and stop and think about what he's saying and make your application. You can see where it's coming from. The conclusion we'll find is Saul met death. And when we get over there, we'll find out why his death came the way it came. And it was all because of God. You see, we can afflict pain. We can afflict judgment. But there is no greater judgment to get somebody's attention than God. I've talked to individuals that have been removed from churches, and I've seen the bitterness in their heart because they didn't understand really why they were when there were other people in the church doing the very same thing. And so I can understand where they come from, and I didn't justify the church doing what they did because they did wrongfully. They did it out of their own spirit rather than the spirit, following the Spirit of the Lord. And that brings all kinds of problems into a church. When God disciplines correctly and we follow his discipline order, carry it out according to his will, there's usually an individual that has been disciplined wanting to come back and get back into the fellowship if they understand what's going on. You see, a lot of things we've gotten way off on. So when we deal with this situation right here in David's prayer, we can look at ourselves and we make the proper application. We're very careful on decisions that we are made. To go the last mile if possible to correct the situation because God's going to take over. And he's going to do the judgment when it comes down to it. Any question at this point? Anything that maybe you have drawn from? I know I'm doing all the talking, but I'm hoping that you're doing the observing. So anything that maybe you have, that you see here that maybe we haven't seen. Okay, chapter 23, verse 1 through 5. In the meantime, the Philistines had attacked Caleb. Now, if you take your map and you go down there, and Caleb is down there by Hebron, down through there, they have attacked. Now, remember, this is in Israel. This is close to where David was raised. This is Hebron. This is where David was recognized as a king and not with Israel. So right here, you find out that this is a very important regional land. And so I want you to notice something here, that this now is a time, and it seems strange, but not, David goes to God in prayer. When he has found out that the Philistines had attacked Caleb, David heard about it and prayed to God. This is the first time now that we see David praying over a situation that needs to be made. So has he learned something back here? Now he's going to have this up and down just like we do. There's times we'll pray and sometimes we don't. We pay the consequences and we go back to pray. So what I'm saying is when we do a character study, we see these characters like David having their ups and downs. They pray, they don't pray, they make this, they don't. We do the same thing. If we're honest, we do the same thing. We need to put them alongside of ourselves, look at them, make an evaluation of ourselves. I did the same thing. Did God hear your prayer? Well, he heard David's prayer. And I'm amazed when I go here and I start studying these things about what happened. Turn your Bible there with me. Chapter 23. And then they told David, saying, behold, the Philistines fight against Caleb. And they robbed the threshing floor. That means they're taking their wheat, their grain. Therefore David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go and smite these Philistines? And the Lord said unto David, go. Was that just a thought? Yeah? No. I don't know. But I know that he did. And it turned right around as you go along with the story. He did. He inquired of the Lord. And then he delivered them. And then after he delivered them, he found out that these people were going to reveal him to Saul. So he asked Abiathar to bring the ephod. And he brought the ephod. Now that ephod was part of the priesthood, that they would put this on, and the stones in it would radiate a yes or a no. And so David asked God, by using the priest, should I go now? And I have to laugh. He says, yes, go. And it's amazing on how all of this thing unfolded. Okay? And it says, David said unto him, behold, let's see. He asked, shall I smite them? God said, yes, smite the Philistines. David's men said unto him, behold, we be afraid here in Judah because of Saul. Remember, he's got Saul on one side and the Philistines on the other side, so no wonder they're fearful. How much more if we come to Caleb again on the army of the Philistines? And David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered and said, rise and go to Caleb, for I will deliver the Philistines unto thee. And David and his men went to Caleb and fought with the Philistines and brought away the cattle, etc., etc., etc. It came to pass that Abiathar, the son of the lad, fled to David with the ephod in his hand, and it was told Saul that David was at Keilah, and Saul said, God has delivered him out of my hand, for he has shut him in by entering into a town that has gates and bars. And Saul called all the people together to war, and to go to Caleb to besiege David and his men. And David knew that David secretly practiced mischief amongst them. He said to Abiathar the priest, bring me the ephod. Then said David, O Lord God of Israel, thy servant has certainly heard Saul seeking to come to Caleb to destroy the city and for my sake. Will the men of Caleb deliver me up unto the hand when Saul comes? And the Lord said, yes. David's paying attention, isn't he? Now let me ask you, if you mess up and you come back to God and start praying, did God pay attention to you? Didn't God say to the Lord Jesus Christ, I will never leave you, I will never forsake you? Didn't David say that in Psalm chapter 56, when I am afraid, I will trust him, for he will never leave me? So he said, I will not be afraid of man, and I will not be afraid of myself. I'll trust God. So here we see twice now, in just a rotation of time, that God has said, yes, go. You see, God has promised that he'll never leave us nor forsake us. And we need to take that to heart. When we get whining and start feeling sorry for ourselves, we need just to stop, go back to some of the Psalms where David had wrote and see the calamities that he was in and say David had a confidence that the Lord will never leave him nor forsake us. And God has told us. In Hebrews chapter 13, he's actually telling the Jews that were getting ready to defect him, Christ, I'll never leave you. I'll never let you down in any given situation. You can trust me. You see, folks, our nature is so prone to trust ourselves. And if you are melancholy, you have a problem. You can be sanguine melancholy, you can be cleric melancholy. As long as you have a melancholy fraction or ounce of melancholy in you, you'll have fears to contend with. God's the only one that can give you victory over those fears. Are you following me? So both of these were winners. And God gave him the victory that he could leave and everything would be okay. Any comments? We're out of time. I don't know where time goes when we get busy and enjoying ourselves. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am presenting it to you, because it means a lot to me. Okay? All right. Pray that I'll be here next week. I don't know for sure.